Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Now, I don't normally do this sort of thing, but I'm going to blow my own trumpet and be a smart-ass. Excuse the expression, but it's the one that springs to mind. One of my viewers, a trifle worried about going public with the article, sent this article, which I'll put in the description, link to the article, as a personal message. Which I went and had a look, and I thought, I've said all that before, but it's nice to see it written down in an article. Now, just going back to my trying to mimic as best as possible, not totally possible obviously, what happens in nature. You've heard me say many times before that the idea of completely soaking my roots in water and then feeding them, to me, is just stupid, because that's not what would happen. The process in nature is that when it rains, whatever decay or anything that's happened since the last time it rained is there for a very short period of time when it starts to rain. And that's when those nutrients get washed down. And after it's been raining a while, there's no more nutrients. It's just rainwater. So orchids have evolved the velamen on their roots to take in that initial flush of water with those nutrients and hold on to it. And then it doesn't matter how much more water you pour over the roots, the nutrients are already in there. And they happen on dry roots. Now, I've been saying that for ages, just based on what happens in nature. So I'm okay with that. You can dispute it if you like, but I'm happy with that because that's how it would happen in nature. You know, the next thing is the level of feed that an orchid is going to get. Now, you have to bear in mind a fair few of our orchids come from sort of areas where they get a monsoon season. It's the growing season, really. And when it rains, it really, really rains. And it rains for a period of time. How much nutrition would be left on the branches and on the trunks to wash down onto the roots the next day after a chuck it down like that? And the answer is next to none. So what level of feed do our orchids get? Next to none. Yeah, and I've covered before about what's going on. You know, we keep talking about feeding our orchids and chucking stuff in through the roots. I mean, some people chuck the whole plant in a bucket, but somehow or other the feed's got to get in there. And I always said that there are some forgotten elements that a plant just can't do without. One of them is oxygen, and the other one is carbon, the building blocks of life. And that comes in through breathing pores on the leaves as carbon dioxide. And the plant grabs hold of that, it needs it. But those breathing bits on the leaves serve two purposes. They allow the exchange of gases, yeah, that's what they're there for. But that does allow the escape of things. So the plants have got a mechanism whereby water and stuff comes in at the bottom, and it says to the top of the plant, okay, you can open up now, we'll exchange some gases and stuff because we've got plenty of water coming in at the bottom. If that plant gets dry, that process shuts down and the CO2 availability is just shut off. And without that, the building blocks don't work. Yeah, so again, think about that sort of thing. But it's the level of feed. Quite honestly, there is one thing that is a right pain in the proverbial, and that's when people say they feed at a certain parts per million of nitrogen. Well, how the hell are you supposed to find that out then? But if you go to the same site that this link will take you to, there's a calculator on there. Now you'll have to fiddle with it, but basically it allows you to put in the 3 main elements of your fertilizer. Like mine's something like 12, 5 and 15, something like that. Just those 3 main numbers, the NPK bit. You put that bit in, and then the next bit of the calculator you have to fiddle with, which is the amount you use in teaspoons per gallon. Well, first of all, that's probably a US gallon, not a proper one. But that's a very arbitrary thing. Teaspoons per gallon, you know, which teaspoon you're going to use, which country, which gallon you're going to use. So that is not a good idea. I was just going to say a daft idea. Actually, I'm sticking to that. It's a daft idea. You have to state your gallon. Get to litres, for God's sake. Then it's universal. And use grams, not teaspoons, and then it's universal. Anyway, if you fiddle with that number, what comes up below is the parts per million of the nitrogen element given your fertilizer breakdown. But the good thing is the bottom figure it gives you is an approximate TDS. Well, that's your total dissolved salts. That's brilliant. So you can work backwards. You know, I mean, I tried putting in 1 teaspoon per gallon and got a TDS reading very, very high. And a parts per million of nitrogen way above what was recommended in the article. So right, I cut it down to 1/4 of a teaspoon. And then suddenly my parts per million of nitrogen started looking around the figure I wanted. Guess what the total TDS reading was? 80. Yeah, well, allowing for the fact that that fertilizer only takes in the 3 main elements and didn't include the calcium and the magnesium, obviously that TDS reading is low because there are other things in the fertilizer that's going to bump that value up. But look how low it is. Does that sound like what might happen out in nature? Very, very low levels of feed every time it rains. As soon as it rains. Not at the end of the rainstorm, at the beginning of the rainstorm. Does that sound about right? Well, it flipping well does to me. And now I've got one of the big guys, what I consider a big guy, somebody in the trade, somebody who's been doing all this sort of stuff. So I'm happy as a bunny now. Because quite honestly, although it was pretty logical, the things I've been saying, it was also theoretical to a degree. Well, I just found backup. And quite honestly, I'm now over the moon. And anybody who wants to talk about feeding really high levels to orchids, well, yes, they may well take it. But how much of it are they really, really going to use? Yeah? And the other thing that comes out of that article is that given the very high percentage of nitrogen and next to no PK, hardly any, but you know what there is a lot of? Calcium. So sit up in bed, Rick, and give yourself a pat on the back. Orchids need a fair bit of that, and they need that magnesium in there, and they need all the trace elements. But basically the building blocks of the plant to produce growth is low levels of a higher percentage of nitrogen than anything else, a good dose of calcium, and good airflow round the leaves to get that gaseous exchange going on, and copious amounts of water chucked in at the bottom with low levels of feed. And then what have you just done? You've mimicked the monsoons. You've mimicked the rainstorms. Got it? So that's me being a smarty pants with a bit of backup this time. So it's just trying to pull things together, that's all it is. And here endeth the subject. No, it's just I have been doing a bit of extra work lately, and I do keep coming across this parts per million of nitrogen, which drives me up the wall. And I keep coming across people talking about gallons and not stating what sort of gallon and stuff like that. So, you know, bear all that in mind. But, you know, a gallon is not necessarily a gallon in different parts of the world. Likewise a teaspoon. So Okay, so go and have a look at the article. It's not long and it's not complicated. It is lovely, simple English. You just read through it, take you a couple of minutes, and then you'll probably sit back and breathe a sigh of relief, because it really has simplified things. And while I think about it, I'll go and find the link to the calculator so that you can put your own 3 main elements of your fertilizer in and fiddle with the volume to get that parts per million of nitrogen, and then give you a pretty good estimate of what the TDS, the total dissolved salts, might be. And then aim somewhere around there. Doesn't have to be precise. It's not a science lab. It's just plants, you know. And if you think about it, you've only got to get one day when it doesn't rain, and the next day when it rains, the feed level's probably a little bit stronger because it's had an extra day to decay. It's still not going to be high levels though. So have a think about that lot then. That's going to stir up a hornet's nest, I bet. And well, bring it on. See you next time. I thought I'd just add this on the end. Guess where my MSU fertilizer comes from? Yep, you got it.